picture this. It is 1919, and Harvard University has just made this monumental, totally unprecedented announcement.
Right.
They have appointed their first ever female faculty member in any field.
Huh?
And the press is just absolutely losing its mind over this.
Oh, they were thrilled.
Yeah, newspapers are declaring, the last citadel has fallen. To the public, it looks like this massive triumph for equality.
But behind closed doors, the reality of that appointment was entirely different. I mean, Harvard essentially treated her like a ghost.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, they refused to let her march in the commencement ceremonies with the male professors. They denied her the standard faculty football tickets, and they even barred her from entering the faculty club.
Are you serious? That is incredibly insulting.
It really was, but her response to all of this fanfare and, frankly, hypocrisy perfectly captures her character. She simply said, "Yes, I am the first woman, but not the first one who should have been appointed."
Wow. So she just called them out completely. She knew exactly what she was walking into, and she refused to just be a quiet, grateful pioneer. And honestly, that is the exact energy we are bringing to this deep dive today.
I love that.
So as always, we take a stack of your sources, articles, research papers, our own notes, and we just extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. Today, our mission is exploring the life of Dr. Alice Hamilton.
Right, which is just a fascinating story.
It really is. We are looking at a biographical journey of a woman born into Gilded Age wealth who pivots from being a sheltered socialite to a total medical pioneer.
She basically invented the field of industrial toxicology in the United States.
Yeah. And her work laid the foundation for modern workplace safety laws and even the weekend as we know it. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how she ended up fighting corporate titans, you really have to look at her starting point, which was essentially American royalty.
Yeah, American royalty is a good way to put it. So Alice Hamilton was born in 1869 in New York, but she actually grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Her grandfather was an Irish immigrant who became this wildly successful land speculator. So her family lived on a private estate that spanned 3 entire city blocks right in the middle of downtown Fort Wayne.
3 city blocks in downtown. That is massive.
Oh, it was huge. Alice, her 3 sisters, and her brother grew up completely insulated, just living on inherited wealth. They were homeschooled by their parents in literature and languages.
Right.
And then Alice was sent off to Miss Porter's finishing school in Connecticut, which was like the absolute pinnacle of elite education for young women at the time.
The name Hamilton might even sound familiar in an academic context to some people listening, because her sister Edith became a famous classicist who literally wrote the textbook Mythology, which is still used in schools today.
Yeah, her family was incredibly academic, but Alice wanted something different. She was really well read, and she found herself inspired by a book about Persia called The Merv Oasis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and because of that, she decided she wanted to be a medical missionary. She basically figured if she couldn't be a traditional missionary, being able to heal the sick would be a practical way to support herself and do something genuinely useful for the world.
But getting that medical training back then required running a brutal gauntlet, right?
Oh, absolutely. She took anatomy classes locally and then actually gained admission to the University of Michigan Medical School, graduating in 1893.
Okay, that's impressive.
Yeah. And after internships in Boston and Minneapolis, she recognized that the real future of medicine lay in this newly emerging field of bacteriology. So she and her sister Edith traveled to Germany to study.
Which, I mean, that sounds glamorous until you consider the institutional gatekeeping of late 19th century European science.
Right. It was definitely not a vacation.
She goes to Germany, and the University of Berlin flat out rejects her simply because she's a woman. She finally manages to get accepted to study in Frankfurt and Munich, but she is constantly facing this intense wall of sexism. I just imagine being left like a welcoming academic environment and more like trying to force your way into this hostile, deeply entrenched society that actively wants you to fail.
That is exactly what it was like. And she navigated that deeply patriarchal academic world while simultaneously going through this profound professional crisis.
What kind of crisis?
Well, traditional medical practice, seeing a patient, diagnosing a symptom, and sending them on their way, it just felt inadequate to her.
Right, like she wasn't actually fixing the root problem.
Exactly. She didn't want to just treat the symptoms of a sick person in a vacuum.
Yeah.
She wanted to understand the biological mechanisms and the environmental factors that made them sick in the first place.
So she has this realization that treating symptoms isn't enough. But academia is a sterile environment. To study the environment making people sick, she had to actually go live in it, which requires a massive sacrifice of her Gilded Age comfort. So how does a woman who grew up completely insulated from the working class on a 3-block estate end up dedicating her life to blue-collar factory workers?
Well, that intellectual curiosity drove her to Chicago. In 1897, she took a job teaching pathology at the Women's Medical School of Northwestern University.
Okay.
But she made a lifestyle choice that was completely radical for someone of her background. She moved into Hull House.
Ah, Hull House. Founded by Jane Addams, right?
Exactly. Hull House was a settlement house embedded right in the middle of an impoverished, working-class, heavily immigrant neighborhood in Chicago.
And the core philosophy of the settlement movement was that reformers had to live side by side with the people they were trying to help to truly understand their struggles.
Exactly. You couldn't just parachute in. You had to live there.
And she lived there full-time from 1897 all the way to 1919.
Yeah, over 2 decades.
She's teaching pathology by day, and by night, she is at Hull House teaching English, teaching art, and running a well baby clinic.
Right.
Because she is living directly next door to these industrial factories and slaughterhouses, she starts noticing terrifying patterns. She is looking at her neighbors and seeing people utterly destroyed by their jobs.
It was devastating.
Yeah, workers coming home with crippling joint pain, severe neurological issues, or just dropping dead from what looked like random ailments.
And her background in bacteriology and pathology allowed her to see what others missed. She realized these weren't random accidents. These were systemic poisonings caused by carbon monoxide, lead, and industrial chemicals.
Right, the environment was the disease.
Yes, so she started applying her rigorous scientific training directly to the streets of Chicago. Like in 1902, there was a massive typhoid epidemic in her neighborhood.
And instead of just treating the patients, she mapped out the outbreak.
Exactly. She physically cross-referenced the locations of the sick with the local infrastructure. She traced the outbreak back to a specific local sanitary inspector who was failing to maintain the separation between raw sewage and the water lines.
Oh, wow. So she proved it was his fault.
Yeah. Her meticulous data got him fired.
That is amazing. And then in 1905, she published a study on respiratory viruses like scarlet fever. She mapped how the virus spread and became one of the very first health experts to tell doctors they needed to wear face masks.
Yeah, she understood the mechanism of airborne droplet transmission decades before it became standard medical practice.
That's just wild to think about.
Well, what's really fascinating here is the stark contrast between how the United States and Europe viewed occupational health at the time.
Oh, right, because Europe was way ahead.
Yeah, when Hamilton started looking into the literature on industrial poisons in 1907, she found that European countries were already deep into the research. They were identifying toxins, passing laws, regulating factories.
And in America?
In America, the medical establishment completely ignored it. Caring about the health of factory workers was viewed with deep suspicion.
Of course it was.
It was dismissed as dangerous socialism or incredibly feminine sentimentality for the poor.
Feminine sentimentality. That is staggering to think about. American workers are dying by the thousands from invisible, airborne, and chemical threats, and literally nobody in power is investigating it.
No one.
So she just decides to do it herself. In 1910, the governor of Illinois appoints her as a medical investigator for a newly formed state commission on occupational diseases.
But keep in mind, there is no centralized database she can just log into for this.
Oh yeah, no digital records.
Right. There are no corporate transparency reports, no digital health records, and certainly no cooperation from the factory owners. She had to invent a completely new methodology.
And here's where it gets really interesting. She pioneers a technique that eventually becomes known as shoe leather epidemiology.
Shoe leather, yeah.
She doesn't sit in a pristine laboratory looking at microscopes. She physically walks into the factories. She tracks down scattered hospital records. She goes into the slums and interviews sick workers right in their living rooms.
It was so hands-on.
If you want a modern equivalent, think about the most rigorous public health contact tracing you can imagine. She's mapping data points, connecting a paralyzed worker's specific neurological symptoms to a specific chemical, and then tracking that exact chemical back to a specific factory floor.
And her most famous early work was the Illinois survey. Through this relentless data collection, she single-handedly discovered over 70 different industrial processes that were exposing workers to severe lead poisoning.
70? That's insane.
And she found it in completely mundane, everyday jobs, too. People were getting lead poisoning from polishing cut glass or from wrapping cigars in what they called tinfoil, but was actually heavily laced with lead.
Think about that for a second. The equivalent for you today would be finding out your aluminum foil or the screen on your smartphone is quietly giving you heavy metal poisoning just by touching it.
It's terrifying.
But wait, let me push back on the logistics of this. Wealthy factory bosses in the 1910s held massive political power. If she's physically walking onto their factory floors and proving they're killing their employees, how does she not get shut down immediately?
Oh, they absolutely tried to stonewall her. But Hamilton's genius was the undeniable rigor of her methodology. She didn't just bring accusations, She brought bulletproof biological mechanisms.
Okay, so she had the hard science to back it up.
Exactly. When she investigated factories, she could point to the exact dust particles in the air, explain how those particles entered the respiratory system, crossed into the bloodstream, and systematically shut down the workers' kidneys or nervous systems.
Wow.
Her data was so meticulously gathered that her findings cornered the industrial barons with undeniable reality. I mean, her work forced the state of Illinois in 1911 and Indiana in 1915 to pass the very first workers' compensation laws.
That is a massive achievement. And the military took notice of this rigor, too. During World War I, the U.S. Army came to her with a mystery.
Yeah, this is a great story.
Workers at a munitions plant in New Jersey were mysteriously dropping sick, developing toxic jaundice and severe anemia, and nobody could figure out why. Hamilton leads a team, investigates the plant, and identifies the explosive compound TNT as the culprit.
Because she discovered that the problem wasn't just inhalation. TNT is lipophilic, meaning it easily binds to fats and can be absorbed directly through the skin.
Right, so just touching it was poisoning them.
Yeah, the workers were handling munitions, the TNT was absorbing through their skin into their bloodstream and triggering the illness.
So how did she fix it?
The fix she recommended wasn't a billion-dollar technological overhaul. It was scientifically informed hygiene. She had them wear specific protective clothing during their shifts and immediately remove and wash that clothing before going home.
Oh, wow. So simple.
Right. By breaking the mechanism of skin absorption, she solved the problem almost instantly.
And that string of massive successes brings us back to that 1919 appointment to Harvard we talked about at the beginning. On the surface, it feels like her ultimate victory lap.
Right. She is recognized as the foremost authority on industrial poisons in America, eventually writing the very first U.S. textbooks on the subject.
But as we know, Harvard wasn't exactly welcoming. She agreed to take the assistant professor job, but only on the condition of a half-time appointment, so she could spend half of every year continuing her fieldwork and living at Hull House.
Yep. And Harvard, despite bringing her on to launch this new field, never promoted her. She remained an assistant professor for her entire 16-year tenure.
16 years and no promotion. That is wild. But it's during this time at Harvard that she faces the most frustrating, high-stakes battle of her entire career. And that is the fight over leaded gasoline.
Oh, this is a heavy one. So in 1925, the government convenes the Tetraethyl Lead Conference in Washington, D.C. At the time, the auto and oil industries had figured out that adding tetraethyl lead to gasoline slowed the combustion rate inside the engine.
Right. It prevented premature detonation, eliminating what they called engine knock.
Exactly. But Hamilton knew the biological cost of that smooth engine, because when lead is burned and expelled from a tailpipe, it becomes aerosolized.
So you are no longer just dealing with lead dust in a specific factory. You are pumping microscopic lead particles into the open air of entire cities.
And Hamilton understood the mechanism perfectly. Aerosolized lead is inhaled into the lungs, enters the bloodstream, and because it chemically mimics calcium, it easily crosses the blood-brain barrier where it begins destroying neurons.
She issues this stark, dire warning to the Surgeon General. She predicts an absolute environmental and public health disaster once millions of cars start pumping aerosolized lead into city streets.
Yeah.
And because she is the preeminent expert, they appoint her to the investigatory panel. But she is the sole scientific voice of caution, sitting across from 7 industry men whose companies stand to make absolute fortunes.
And to make matters worse, the panel is only given 7 months to investigate and deliver a verdict on the safety of leaded gas.
Wait, I need to understand this. They gave her 7 months to prove long-term chronic illness.
Yep.
Scientifically, that's impossible. If you are dealing with a chemical that slowly accumulates in the bones and brain over years, How did she even attempt to build a case in that time frame?
Well, she couldn't, and the industry executives knew it. Hamilton argued fiercely that 7 months was nowhere near enough time to study the chronic, slow-building effects of lead exposure on a population.
But they didn't care.
No, she was outvoted. The panel hesitantly approved the use of leaded gas, placing the burden of proof on the victims rather than requiring the corporations to prove their product was safe.
Put yourself in her shoes for a moment. Imagine you have the hard scientific truth. You know the exact biological mechanism of how this chemical destroys the human brain, and you know banning it will save millions of lives. But you have to sit in a Washington boardroom and watch executives overrule you for profit.
It's devastating, and it raises an important question, right? How does a society balance the desire for rapid technological and industrial progress with the burden of proof required to protect public health?
It's a question we still struggle with today.
Absolutely. In the 1920s, the system demanded Hamilton prove the chemical was deadly in an impossibly short window, rather than demanding the industry prove it was safe over the long term.
And the cost of that structural failure was staggering. The EPA later estimated that because her warnings were overridden, 68 million children suffered highly toxic exposure to lead from vehicle emissions over the next 60 years.
68 million children.
Just imagine if that was your car pumping invisible toxins into your neighborhood, all because a boardroom ignored the science. It is absolutely heartbreaking.
It really is.
But Hamilton didn't let defeats like that break her spirit. She just broadened her scope. She wasn't just a scientist. She was a fierce global activist.
Yes. She viewed occupational health as one piece of a much larger puzzle of human rights. Back during World War I in 1915, she actually traveled with Jane Addams to the International Congress of Women at The Hague to advocate for peace.
Wow.
Yeah, and she returned to Europe in 1919 to help organize famine relief in a devastated Germany. From 1924 to 1930, she served as the only female member of the League of Nations Health Committee.
She was incredibly sharp when it came to spotting political sickness, too. Like, in 1933, she visited Nazi Germany shortly after Hitler came to power.
Right.
She comes back and writes a blistering, highly observant critique for the New York Times called "The Youth Who Are Hitler's Strength." She outlines exactly how the Nazi regime is exploiting young people, specifically calling out their regressive domestic training programs designed to subjugate girls.
And because she was so consistently outspoken, advocating for civil liberties, peace, the legalization of birth control, and strict labor laws, she made powerful enemies. Critics in the government and the industrial sector frequently tried to dismiss her. They would label her a radical or a subversive.
It's a classic playbook. When you map the data and threaten the profit margins of the powerful, they try to paint you as an extremist rather than debate your science.
Exactly. But her global activism was simply an extension of her scientific work. It all traced back to her core ethos, which was a fundamental, non-negotiable belief in the value of human life.
Right.
It didn't matter to Dr. Hamilton if you were a stonecutter inhaling silica dust in an Indiana quarry, a munitions worker absorbing TNT in New Jersey, or a starving civilian in post-war Europe. She believed society had a moral obligation to protect human life from systemic destruction.
She truly walked the walk for a century. She eventually retired to a home in Hadlime, Connecticut, living with her sister, but she never really stopped working.
No, she didn't.
She published her autobiography, Exploring the Dangerous Trades, in 1943. She continuously updated her textbooks on industrial toxicology. And she lived to the incredible age of 101, passing away from a stroke in 1970.
And the timing of her death provides this almost cinematic closure to her story.
How so?
Well, just 3 months after Alice Hamilton died, the United States Congress finally passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act, creating OSHA.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. It was the ultimate nationwide institutionalization of the regulatory framework she had fought for her entire life.
So, what does this all mean for us today?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means that every single time you put on a pair of safety goggles, wear a respirator, or rely on a workplace ventilation regulation, you are interacting with Alice Hamilton's legacy.
That's a great point.
Before her, American society broadly viewed the neurological destruction and death of workers as just the cost of doing business. She took that toxic assumption, applied a rigorous, undeniable biological science to it, and fundamentally changed the moral math of American industry.
She really did. She refused to accept things as they appeared on the surface, whether it was a fake victory at Harvard, a mysterious illness on a factory floor, or the invisible exhaust coming from a car engine.
Exactly.
So next time you read a headline about a mysterious new illness linked to microplastics in our bloodstream, forever chemicals in our drinking water, or the hidden toxins in the technology you hold in your hand every single day, ask yourself, who are the Alice Hamiltons of our era? Who is out there right now mapping the data, doing the grueling shoe leather work to prove the biological mechanisms of the invisible dangers that surround us? And more importantly, are we actually going to listen to them this time?